My previous coverage of this mystery didn't suffer from some blatant falsehood. There were no omitted files or secret financial holdings. The issue was actually physical stature. Federal agents noted the figure on Nancy Guthrie's porch, captured by the nighttime surveillance feed, stood roughly 5'9" or 5'10". He had an ordinary frame, neither towering nor particularly short. Tommaso Cioni stands quite a bit taller. If that shadow on the deck isn't Tommaso, my previous hypothesis completely falls to pieces. I've analyzed every single comment. I believe I've uncovered a jarring, overlooked detail right here. Before identifying that individual, we must revisit the exact evening when everything went wrong. January 31st. Nancy Guthrie was 84 and had occupied her Tucson residence since 1985. Her garden was filled with native desert flora, featuring a reinforced entrance and long-term neighbors. Between 9:30 and 9:50 that night, Tommaso, her son-in-law, left her at the curb. He claims he witnessed her entering safely. He insists she was fine. 4 hours later, a shadowy figure approached her entrance. The Ring camera recorded him wearing a face covering and surgical gloves. He carried a dark Ozark trail pack. A visible holster appeared to be strapped around his midsection. He reached out and manipulated the lens. Then he entered. Nancy Guthrie hasn't been seen since. No remains, no ransom notes, and no verified leads. Exist only a heavy, crushing silence. That void is haunting. Vanishing like this leaves only two options. This was either a random act or a calculated strike. Sheriff Nanos explicitly stated his belief that Nancy was a mark. It wasn't chance. She was chosen. This required someone who recognized her, understood her habits, and knew exactly when she would be vulnerable. Which returns us to our complication. If Tommaso's height rules him out as the porch intruder, perhaps he wasn't there at all. Maybe he didn't need to be. Could there be an architect and a separate operative? Think of it like this. Suppose a person decides to construct a home. One individual sketches the blueprints, the designer. Another person actually hammers the nails, the carpenter. Both are essential, but the observer only sees the one swinging the tool. Previously, Anna posited that Tommaso was the mastermind who understood the layout, the security cameras, and Nancy's daily itinerary. If he didn't physically strike that night, then a surrogate did. Someone matching the height description who knew how to breach a dark house. Someone comfortable confronting the elderly. A person who potentially had a history with such activities. That is where our new player appears, Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. Before jumping to conclusions, listen closely. No police department has officially labeled Dominic Evans a person of interest. The Federal Bureau of Investigation hasn't detained him, nor has the sheriff filed charges. My information comes strictly from verifiable public records. This isn't a courtroom verdict, it's an inquiry. Who exactly is Dominic Evans? To find out, we have to travel back nearly 20 years to 2007. 3 strangers responded to music classifieds on Craigslist. 1 drummer, 1 guitarist, and a vocalist who played bass. Their group was named Early Black. Dominic drummed while Tommaso sang and played bass. They rehearsed, recorded tracks, and toured local venues across Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff. Fame eluded them, yet they remained inseparable for 19 years. That isn't just an acquaintance. That span covers birthdays, holidays, long road trips, and deep conversations after late-night practices. You learn someone's private struggles, their financial debts, and their family dynamics. Throughout those 19 years, Tommaso was wed to Nancy's daughter. Consequently, Dominic was well aware of that household. He likely knew about Savannah. He heard stories of Nancy through simple friendship, not surveillance. Friends share their lives. And when a betrayal occurs, these long-term bonds become critical. Now, we must examine the darker facts. Dominic Evans has a Pima County criminal history. Legal files show felonies including breaking and entering, armed robbery, embezzlement, and driving under the influence. These are documented facts. I want you to consider what those legal terms actually imply in reality. Burglary isn't just petty theft. It's violating a private space with criminal intent. It's an invasion. Robbery is far more aggressive. It requires taking property through direct force or intimidation. It involves a physical confrontation and overpowering someone. That requires a very specific, cold-blooded psychological makeup. Few individuals ever breach that moral boundary. To invade her residence at night, confront her, and take her away requires a specific psychological shift. Security video captured someone who was not panicking. His actions were steady and methodical. He moved with intent, reaching for the lens as if he recognized its function. Hand protection was visible. This does not look like some intoxicated wanderer. This reveals the actions of a calculated strategist. Granted, having a record does not mean someone will always offend. Humanity is capable of growth and redemption. Yet, when analyzing specific expertise, past actions provide context. Who else in that circle has the stealth to slip inside unnoticed? Who possesses the nerves to remain calm when encountering a stranger in total darkness? Understanding how to vanish into the shadows is a learned skill, often honed through prior thefts. Once you learn the trait of robbery, those instincts stay with you forever. Much like a percussionist remembers a beat, those habits are ingrained. Consider the height, 5'9" to 5'10". Dominic Evans matches that physical description. Normal frame, stubble. Observers even pointed out a potential arm marking in archival video. I will not claim a blurry image confirms a suspect's identity. Grainy video can be incredibly misleading. Shadows and perspectives play tricks, and face coverings obscure the truth. Instead, we analyze behaviors. We examine social ties and geographical links. Dominic has been a Tucson local for a long time. Nancy resided in the foothills, while the other two lived roughly 4 miles from her front door. If you plot these spots, they create a small cluster in northern Tucson. Very accessible. Orchestrating a scheme that requires local knowledge and navigating dark streets is easier when you live there. Residing nearby is helpful, but the most compelling evidence surfaced only after she vanished. Forensic teams discovered 2 distinct male genetic profiles that were previously unknown. One sample was found on a discarded glove 2 miles away, appearing identical to the one on video. This specific genetic material does not match Nancy or any of her relatives. It is not registered in federal crime databases. A second set of evidence was located inside her residence. Law enforcement clarified a vital detail. The indoor evidence is different from what was on the glove. That indicates 2 separate individuals left their mark at the scene of the disappearance. This is not a solo act. Knowing there are 2 people resolves the confusion regarding the suspect's height. One could be larger, the other smaller. One designs the plan, while the other carries it out. But how do 2 accomplices manage this? Consider Nancy's health. She was 84 and struggled with movement. You cannot simply force her into a vehicle quickly without causing a major medical crisis. The process would be slow. Someone had to stand guard to ensure no neighbors noticed or drove past. You cannot be inside the house and monitoring the perimeter at the exact same moment. This implies a level of teamwork that requires deep personal reliance. Such bonds usually take years to form. Let us look back to January 23rd, shortly before she went missing. A bizarre incident occurred where a man was filmed walking backward near the property. He looked completely out of place. Many suspect this was a practice run for the actual crime. They were likely checking security cameras and response times. It is possible both perpetrators were there that night. While one person walked the route, the other likely sat in a car, monitoring the clock. On the night of February 1st, they likely used burner phones or left them behind to hide. But January 23rd was just a test. They did not expect anyone to be watching them then. If 2 devices pinged the same towers on both those specific dates, that creates a damning trail. Mobile devices link up with nearby signal towers without the user doing anything. These electronic trails exist even when the phone is not being used. Detectives can trace these movements. Seeing 2 devices follow identical paths on both nights is incredible evidence. Then there are the odd ransom notes. The author used the term "the main individual" instead of calling them a kidnapper. Not the culprit, but the main individual. Such phrasing implies a hierarchy of roles, suggesting the writer is intimately familiar with the operation. I have seen enough to know the facts, yet I am still not feeling safe. Secret circles often crumble under pressure, particularly when a bounty of $200,000 is on the table. Cash has a way of straining devotion and pushing lifelong bonds to the limit. 19-year connections face a true trial when forensic evidence surfaces and family trees start connecting the dots through distant relatives. Let us take a moment here as the upcoming chapter reveals the consequences of mounting tension. It explores the fallout when a pair of decades-long companions suddenly refuse to speak. As the probe enters its peak intensity and genetic markers begin to tell their tale, a single clue decides the outcome. However, before taking another step forward, we must examine a minor straightforward detail regarding the entryway at Nancy's residence, specifically her outer gate. This might appear trivial, yet the tiniest facts often scream the loudest truths, especially in Tucson where dual-door setups are common. You typically find the primary entrance shielded by a heavy iron security screen, serving as an additional obstacle. Nancy's place featured this extra layer. Recall the video where the figure approaches without any visible effort or resistance. There is no kicking, no jimmying, and no equipment involved. He simply extends a hand to nudge the lens. He then proceeds inward, yet the recording never shows him actually breaching a secured entryway. We are left with two straightforward scenarios. Perhaps Nancy, who was 84, simply failed to engage the latch. Having spent years in that peaceful cul-de-sac, she likely felt completely at ease in her surroundings. She might have never expected a midnight intruder, which is plausible, but an alternative theory exists. Perhaps an earlier visitor deliberately left the path open, someone intimately familiar with the house's configuration. A person aware that a locked gate would ruin everything. Consider that Tommaso returned her home around 9:40 that evening. While he claims he saw her enter safely, did he bother to verify that the security screen was actually latched? Did he confirm it was fully closed, or was it positioned to let an intruder slip in later that night? To be clear, this is a query rather than a charge, because the visitor on the stoop faced zero resistance. His movement suggested he was traversing a route that had been conveniently prepared for him. If the way was indeed paved, it strongly hints at a calculated partnership. Let us zoom out to view the entire situation. Two separate genetic samples were recovered. We have two suspects, a likely practice run on January 23rd, a specific target, and a stealthy abduction. Nobody heard any shouting, and the trail went cold immediately. This feels less like a frantic act and more like a precise operation. Such precision usually stems from careful preparation, and preparation typically necessitates constant contact. If a duo pulled this off, how did they stay in sync? Through mobile devices, messaging, or standard voice calls? Seasoned defenders understand digital breadcrumbs, so perhaps they met face-to-face, used encrypted platforms, or left their devices behind. However, one piece of evidence is nearly impossible to scrub: the geographical logs stored by cellular infrastructure. Your device pings local transmitters regardless of whether you dial a number, leaving a permanent electronic footprint. Detectives can utilize a tower dump to see every single handset that accessed specific sites during the window of the crime. By analyzing logs from the night of January 23rd and February 1st, authorities can identify recurring signals. When the same two phones appear in Nancy's vicinity during both incidents, it establishes a clear, damning trend. Such trends carry immense weight in a trial, because while flukes occur once, they rarely repeat. It is highly improbable for the same individuals to be at the same spot twice. Now, consider this scenario. Imagine a pair of devices tracing the same route to her house on January 23rd and February 1st, belonging to associates. Friends with a 19-year history would find themselves facing more than just suspicion. They would likely face arrest. Keep in mind that January 23rd was intended to stay completely under the radar. During a potential dry run, perpetrators often get sloppy and keep their mobiles on them like any other day. They likely used their personal vehicles, operating under the assumption that no one was watching. However, the emergence of that strange security video turned that specific evening into a focal point of the case. Now we address the quiet that followed. After the disappearance, the press swarmed Tommaso's property. News crews camped out and lenses were fixed on his entrance, but then the atmosphere shifted. News Nation reports that Tommaso has vanished from view, avoiding his residence and refusing all requests for public interviews. There might be logical reasons for this. Perhaps his attorney suggested avoiding any interaction with the media. He may feel totally crushed by events and sought isolation, yet Dominic Evans has also gone radio silent. No declarations, no interviews, no social media activity, and certainly no public prayers for Nancy to be located. In our current culture, most individuals share a brief thought online, even if it is just a prayer. Keeping quiet can imply several things, but mutual silence from two close associates is quite noteworthy. Simultaneous silence feels strategically planned, as if both received the same command: stay quiet and just wait. Perhaps they are both anticipating the same event, the finalized DNA findings, because once those results are confirmed, they are entered into the federal system. A match brings instant clarity, otherwise the team pivots to genetic genealogy. This technique scans for distant kin and cousins, or hobbyists who used heritage websites for personal enjoyment. From those links, detectives meticulously build family trees limb by limb until they isolate a single identity. The work may take months, yet it remains effective, having solved mysteries that were cold for several decades. This current case is fresh, meaning physical evidence is cleaner and tracking digital footprints is much simpler. If a genetic profile matches someone with an Arizona criminal history, their biological data was likely recorded already. Should that be the case and a match occurs, this period of waiting could be incredibly short. Even without a hit in the offender database, the genealogical process can still successfully pinpoint a suspect. If that specific name leads back to someone within the original inner circle of associates, an individual with a 19-year connection, then our previous framework transforms from a theory into a solid structure. It gains structure. There is another factor to analyze: the ransom-style digital messages. One specific note claimed the author knows the primary individual. That particular phrasing seems quite odd. If only one person kidnapped her, why use a title? Formal titles usually imply specific roles. It suggests a hierarchy, like a team project where one person directs and others simply offer their assistance. The individual drafting those emails mentioned they were taking a huge risk for his overall security. That sounds like a person who feels uncomfortably close to the fire, frightened by their own proximity, informed enough to know secrets, yet lacking the resolve to speak. If a small circle knows the truth, pressure will test them. That bounty is $200,000, which constitutes life-altering wealth for many. Such sums can destroy friendships and loyalties, especially if one suspect fears the DNA will eventually find them anyway. Consider another point. If two people collaborated, the bond of trust between them would have to be flawless. They must believe that neither partner will talk, crack under pressure, or make a single clumsy error. However, people always stumble. Whether the slip is minor or massive, tiny mistakes leave very long trails. Like a discarded glove found miles away, a suspicious figure on film, or a phrase that reveals too much. This is where the narrative tightens, as everything discussed so far converges on one pivotal question. If there were two involved, which one breaks first? The mastermind or the person carrying it out? What happens when one realizes that staying mute might not save them? Initially, silence feels like a fortress. It feels secure. By saying nothing, you cannot contradict your own story or commit a damaging verbal slip. By remaining silent, you provide no fresh leads for the law, yet that silence creates its own tension. Pressure increases as news crews wait outside, and it rises as the DNA testing continues to move forward. Tension grows as rewards increase. Eventually, this pressure forces people to look at their partners very differently. Imagine two suspects in separate homes, both watching the same broadcast, both hearing the term genetic genealogy, and hearing about two profiles while knowing exactly where they were on January 23rd. Trust is simple when the situation is calm. Trust is far harder when police helicopters are overhead and detectives are knocking on your front door. Every time your phone rings, you wonder if it is over. Every car slowing down near your house brings fear. If one person suspects the other might break, that doubt intensifies. Now, consider the possible motive. Without a clear motive, a theory has no weight. Sheriff Nanos stated that Nancy was specifically targeted. What makes an 84-year-old woman such a specific target? In these types of crimes, a few motives typically emerge. It usually boils down to greed, leverage, old grudges, or pursuing high-worth assets. Nancy was a fixture in her neighborhood for years, and those Catalina foothill properties are worth a fortune. Land titles tell the whole story. Then, months before she vanished, a suspicious red flag appeared. A power of attorney authorized 8 months prior. Such a document hands over total control regarding a person's bank accounts and legal choices. On its own, that paperwork doesn't prove someone committed a crime. Families often use these for aging parents. It is standard practice, yet the specific timing here is chilling. That legal signature 8 months out marks the start, followed by the rehearsal, the drop-off, and finally the snatching. When building a criminal profile, detectives map out sequences, stack events, and hunt for sudden shifts. They prioritize odd behavior and red flags. What seems mundane initially often proves vital later on. Consider specialized talents again. Burglars master breaking in, while robbers specialize in face-to-face threats. Fraudsters excel at playing the long game of lies, while music surprisingly hones internal timing and focus. Drummers master the art of the beat, maintaining a steady pulse while the world spins around them. Having rhythm doesn't make you a thug, but it implies extreme focus. Now, picture two people plotting. One provides the floor plan, while the partner handles the heavy lifting. Every detail requires discussion. Parking spots, escape routes, camera locations, the walk from the porch to the curb, and neighbor visibility. They would have to coordinate who holds the gear bag, who carries the weapon, who kills the feed, and who acts as lookout. These weren't panic choices. These were calculated moves made weeks ahead. That porch video shows zero fear, just cold precision. Here's another critical piece of the puzzle. The backpack was a 25-liter Ozark Trail from Walmart. Feds are now tracking those sales data. How many sold in the last 60 days? Are there digital receipts, or was it a cash and carry deal? A bag seems minor, but a fresh purchase leaves a trail, and trails always lead back to identities. Same for that holster. Sheriff Nanos called it rare, so they're visiting gun shops to find the source. If that specific gear was bought recently, a paper record likely exists somewhere. Step inside the perpetrator's head. Gloves hide prints, masks hide faces, and bags hide evidence. But they always forget the invisible stuff. What about the genetic material left behind? Gloves stop fingerprints, but they trap sweat and skin cells, your own biological signature inside. Finding a discarded glove 2 miles away suggests a panic toss. Did it rip? Was it dead weight? Maybe it went out a car window while fleeing. With two people, one drives while the other peels off layers. Tiny movements lead to massive blunders. And those tiny blunders are how killers get caught. Imagine the task force layering phone pings, genetic markers, and credit card transactions. They don't need a smoking gun confession. They just need a web of undeniable links. Once that web tightens, there's no way out. But we must remember the soul of this story. Nancy Guthrie isn't just a file number. She's a grandmother who spent 40 years in that home. Savannah Guthrie has been posting heart-wrenching pleas, speaking directly to the people who took her. Her message is simple. Doing the right thing is always an option. Those words hit hard. They are aimed at a guilty conscience watching from the shadows, someone who can still choose. If two people did this, one is likely breaking. Remorse and terror grow heavy after 3 weeks. 23 days have passed. The initial rush of the crime is gone. Now, only the suffocating silence remains. But look at the long-term threat for them. Even if news coverage fades and the task force shrinks, biological evidence doesn't have an expiration date. Digital footprints and records are permanent. Once the spotlight dims, the suspects might get sloppy. They might start traveling, hopping back on social media, or talking to the wrong person. Just when they think the heat is off, that's exactly when the handcuffs click. Ask yourself this. Imagine being blameless, yet finding your reputation dragged through social media regarding a vanished senior. How would you react? Liz, would you take a stand? Would you scream your innocence? Is offering public condolences the right move, or is keeping quiet better? While no perfect response exists, actions speak volumes, and detectives analyze every move meticulously. Forget feelings, track regularity. Back to that specific wording used in the extortion messages. The primary person. Such phrasing implies a structured group. A lead figure naturally implies the presence of accomplices. With partners involved, those subordinates likely feel vulnerable and unstable, sensing their safety slipping away as the spotlight intensifies, sparking genuine terror. Panic triggers erratic choices. Now consider that 19-year bond, which spans nearly 2 decades of shared history. Yet enduring ties often shatter when the heat rises, whether the catalyst is greed, fright, or the undeniable evidence of genetic coding. Biometrics offer no deception, maintaining an eternal memory regardless of fabricated tales. Once a biological link is confirmed, the floodgates inevitably burst. Law enforcement arrives with legal paperwork, and officers start posing inquiries that are nearly impossible to navigate without showing visible distress. This raises the stakes. What occurs if the forensic results point directly toward a member of that tight-knit group? Who blinks first? and what unfolds in the aftermath. Once that initial step is taken, the entire landscape shifts irrevocably. By being the first to break, an individual secures the ultimate advantage, dominating the entire narrative. Typically, the early bird gets the leniency, as that is the legal reality. The prosecution places high value on actionable intel. The state favors transparency, offering incentives to whoever chooses to end the quiet. Picture two suspects holding the truth, both realizing that if their counterpart cuts a deal first, their own fate is sealed. Such internal friction is silent but overwhelming. Now, focus on an aspect that has largely been overlooked until now: the clock. Between 9:30 p.m., when Nancy was last seen, and roughly 2 a.m., there is a 4-hour gap. 4 hours provides ample opportunity, more than enough time for a person to get back to their residence. Plenty of time for calls, strategy, and teamwork. If this was a random act, that 4-hour lull is difficult to explain. However, in a calculated scheme, that interval likely served as the crucial prep stage, a period for exiting the home, linking up with a partner, swapping cars, donning disguises, and pulling on protective gear. Masking up and returning while hidden by the night, but we must also consider the prevalence of local surveillance. Residential areas in Tucson are packed with smart doorbells, parking sensors, public lenses, and even technology for scanning plates. Evading detection would require a strategic path, specifically targeting side roads where digital eyes are less likely to be watching. Identifying the dimmest exits and finding spots to stash a vehicle where the optics are poor or non-existent. Such precision demands intimate familiarity with the neighborhood, the kind only gained through years of residency or frequent commutes. Think about the trek heading down from the Catalina foothills into the more isolated rustic outskirts. Rio Rico is 60 miles south of the city, right by the boundary, featuring desolate plains and unpaved trails. At 2:30 a.m., it is a ghost town. For those seeking solitude, that region is ideal. To be clear, no hard proof exists that Nancy was ever brought there. Nevertheless, when detectives brainstorm locations for vanishing a victim without any onlookers, they scrutinize regions exactly like this one. Desolate regions with few inhabitants and virtually no electronic monitoring. If a suspect possesses links to such a location, it fits perfectly into the puzzle. Now, imagine entering the precinct's war room. Detectives hunched over desks while maps plaster the walls, alongside Nancy's portraits and freeze frames from security videos and pings. A roster of associates linked to the relatives, with chronological logs pinned nearby. January 23rd, 31st, February 1st, 9th, and 13th, they claim every second counts and no evidence stands in isolation. They stack findings, genetic traces on clothing and within the residence, mobile pings, retail receipts from big box stores, and equipment purchases, firearm sales ledgers, road surveillance, financial statements, legal authorizations, past acquaintances, and old police records. They examine the whole picture, realizing that complex cases are never cracked by a single piece of info. Resolution comes through synthesis, making the concept of a co-conspirator vital to the theory. When double genetic markers are found, the hunt expands beyond just a lone suspect. They seek a pair. Catching the first suspect provides the ultimate leverage needed to squeeze out the truth. Authorities can present the facts and demand details regarding the other person's involvement. They query about digital logs and that specific night in January. Often, when faced with cold data, tongues loosen. Consider another scenario. What if a genetic sample identifies a person who was completely off the radar? A figure currently absent from digital discussions. A person existing beyond that initial inner group. Should that occur, the whole perspective changes since real inquiries require total flexibility. This strategic blueprint serves merely as equipment. If facts disprove the theory, we discard it. Such is the nature of a sincere search for truth. However, if clues support the idea and identities fit known ties, this concept turns into the prosecution's foundation. Take another look at Savannah's open appeals. She is addressing the individual who abducted her mom directly. She claims there is still time. Such words aren't simply heartfelt, they are calculated. This seeds uncertainty within any accomplice's head. It signals that a route toward leniency remains open, and forgiveness looks attractive as terror mounts. Particularly if you weren't the primary mastermind. Mostly if you were dragged into the mess. If a person feels like a mere sidekick, If one feels vulnerable or suspects the leader will betray them, they might choose to speak up. Let us go back to the stature discrepancy. The specific point that triggered this whole deep dive. 5'9" to 5'10". Normal frame with whiskers. That profile did not suit Tommaso exactly, yet it fits Dominic. And should the genetic material found inside that mitten link to a man of that size? The physical conflict vanishes, not through forcing the narrative, but via factual resolution. Conversely, if the biological sample points elsewhere, our current hypothesis loses its strength. This matters because authentic detective work demands acknowledging every flaw. Now consider the psyche of people. When a pair hides a massive secret, they communicate with extreme caution, perhaps avoiding messages or phone conversations. Perhaps they connect face-to-face. Yet even personal meetings carry danger. Witnesses watch. Street lenses record. Mobile devices ping antennas despite being idle. Contemporary existence creates footprints. Hardly anyone vanishes without a trace. The plotter possessed the foresight to utilize hand coverings, disguises, and lens interference. That implies some expertise. Yet caution isn't flawless, as excellence is elusive. Even experts stumble occasionally. In this instance, at least two blunders occurred: the practice video and the discarded glove. Minor errors, yet tiny cracks can destroy grand schemes. Picture detectives anticipating the forensic lab's results. As time ticks by, an identity draws near. Once revealed, the pace accelerates. Interrogations, legal raids, hardware confiscations, technical data mining, extensive financial audits. If a duo was involved, the detectives can compare their narratives. They can effectively test those stories against each other. Uniformity is vital now. If chronologies differ, the facade begins to crumble. If digital logs disprove verbal claims, the gaps grow wider until the legal defenses finally collapse. This entire narrative intensifies right here because we are currently at a stage where nothing is officially verified for the public. However, several investigative routes are narrowing. The biological trail, signal pings, financial records, and psychological patterns. When all these paths lead to the same group of souls, that is when the investigation shifts from questions to formal indictments. Nevertheless, that moment hasn't arrived. We remain in the suspenseful interval. This is the deadliest period for any guilty party, as waiting provides time to ponder, which brings doubt, and doubt eventually leads to the commission of fatal mistakes. Envision another possibility. What if the forensic evidence within the residence identifies a close associate of Nancy, a person with valid entry, while the glove's profile points to a completely different stranger? That complicates the entire puzzle, suggesting internal betrayal paired with external force, hinting at a conspiracy while raising many new enigmas, which is exactly why the authorities remain so incredibly careful. Authorities don't hurry. They verify. They verify facts repeatedly. They construct the case cautiously to ensure absolute certainty upon arrest. Let's revisit that 19-year bond again. 19 years of mutual pasts, band practices, studio hours, midnight talks, inside humor, and hard times. Breaking such a deep connection under duress is difficult. Still, it isn't out of the question, particularly when the threat of incarceration looms and the role of the fall guy feels terrifying. Minor participants typically face tougher penalties for silence, whereas cooperation offers a chance at leniency. Naturally, someone realizing this would begin evaluating their limited choices. Maintain allegiance or prioritize survival. That crossroads is where this tale is likely headed. The second that one party decides to favor their own self-preservation, the entire game shifts. Once the survival instinct kicks in, the wall of silence finally breaks apart. Once quiet shatters, reality hits hard. Picture a stark interrogation space, one desk, a few seats, a tape device rolling. A detective spreads out documents, ping logs, genetic evidence, retail histories, and topographical charts. The suspect stares at a stark timeline of their own life every minute, and street corner mapped out clearly. There is no yelling or intimidation from the law. They just softly request, "Please, help us fill the gaps." Suddenly, being faithful feels risky. Staying silent means taking all the heat, while talking means cutting a deal. Look at the big picture. Facts exist. Nancy Guthrie was a mark. 2 genetic markers were found. A dry run happened 8 days prior. A man matching the federal profile approached her residence boldly. A stray glove turned up 2 miles from there. Extortion messages mentioned a primary suspect. Deep-rooted ties link two associates directly to the victim's inner circle. These are hard truths, not rumors or wild guesses. Real data, we just lack the name behind the genetic code on that glove. Who left biological traces inside the residence? Which devices pinged nearby on both January 23rd and February 1st? Who bought that pack? Who purchased the weapon case? Such clarity is coming. Once revealed, these details will either solidify our hypothesis or destroy it. Should the genetic evidence point away from our initial suspects, the entire narrative must evolve. If it confirms them, the pressure intensifies. However, being right about a hunch is not the priority here. The objective is finding Nancy, solving the mystery, and providing closure for a family trapped in an endless nightmare. Often, the breakthrough is subtle, lacking the fanfare of a televised police raid or flashing blue lights, appearing instead via lab work, digital footprints, or a dawn visit from authorities. A $200,000 bounty stands. That sum haunts the thoughts of anyone holding back information. Wealth alters logic. Terror shifts priorities. Passing weeks change minds. When partners hide a crime, the clock becomes their greatest foe. Burdensome truths expand until the pressure becomes unbearable. This is our current position. The physical stature conflict that seemed to derail the case now serves as a bridge to a grander scheme. Double genetic findings suggest a conspiracy. Surveillance of the practice run indicates this was no random occurrence. Demand notes imply complex motives. Mapping shows close contact. Personal history suggests deep-seated familiarity. Professional backgrounds suggest proficiency. Yet, physical proof, not feelings or internet rumors, will be the final judge. Science will testify, technology will testify, sales receipts will testify, and eventually, the truth will surface. For now, Nancy Guthrie is still gone. She is more than a story or a puzzle. She is a person waiting for justice. A witness exists out there who remembers exactly what occurred on the evening of January 31st. A duo might know, or perhaps a group. Regardless, the light eventually finds the dark. It just takes time. Once the final puzzle piece slots in, the whole landscape changes. At that point, speculation will be over. Hard evidence will be our guide. Those details will either validate the mastermind enforcer theory or reveal a completely hidden direction. Either way, the suspense concludes. When that day arrives, the wall of silence will crumble. This chapter of Nancy Guthrie's life is ongoing. We are in a holding pattern. The forthcoming genetic profile release could rewrite the entire investigation.